I think the biggest one is the concept around that there's always a bigger goal, right? It has to start with my ability to perceive that I can get to a bigger place. If I can't perceive that, it is never going to happen. I think is what happens to entrepreneurs sometimes. We get to this place where we feel like, hey, we've got a pretty successful business. I can't really picture my business getting bigger than this. But if I can't get bigger than this, if I can't perceive it, I'm never going to do it. And so it's that concept of there is always a bigger goal that I can get into.
This is the Entrepreneurs United podcast with your hosts, John St. Pierre and Rich Hoffman.
Hey, fellow entrepreneurs. Today we're sitting down with Tim Regan. He's the founder and CEO of PrairieView Wealth Partners. And Tim, you help people find and live their best 2 life. Can you tell us, what does that 2 life mean and why are you so passionate about it?
Yeah, for sure. First, thanks for having me on. It's a blessing to be here and I appreciate you inviting me. So the 2 life, when you think about, the easiest way to think about it is you think about $1 million. How many commas are in a million? There's 2. And so that's where the 2 life comes from. But the thought beyond that is it's not so much about the money. You have some people that they think $1 million is beyond their grasp, right? It's so much money they can't even imagine what they do with it. And you have other people that think there's no way I could live on $1 million a year, let alone have $1 million. And it's not really about the money, but it's about what living what we would call the millionaire lifestyle looks like. When I think about a millionaire's lifestyle, I think about living in abundance. And I think about freedom of time and freedom of purpose and the ability to choose who I get to spend my time with and how I spend my time. I think about the ability to be generous and live in gratitude, in abundance rather than scarcity. And that's really what we call the 2 life. And that looks different for each person, but for everybody, they have their definition of what that looks like. And so that's what we mean by living the 2 life. And we're fortunate enough that we help people first identify what does that look like for them. But then secondly, how do I put together all my money so that I can actually achieve what I'm trying to?
Tim, for how long have you been living a 2 life? And at what point did you realize you were?
So I think it's always aspirational, right? It's like the horizon. You get to one point you think is exactly where you want to be. And then you realize, oh, wait, there's even some more that I can do, so to answer how long is probably a tough question. But I can tell you that within the last probably, at least 5 years, have realized that, yeah, that's what we're looking for. And it really comes down to a second concept that we talk to people about, which is how to get out of their fishbowl. And when you think about the fishbowl concept, picture a goldfish, and they talk about how a goldfish will grow to the size of the bowl that it's in. And our perspective is that everybody has their own bowl that they're living within. And that bowl is shaped by, where did you grow up? How much money did your family have when you were younger? Were you ever laid off for a period of time and didn't have all of these things that we start to form as kind of our barriers, and our lives only grow as big as that bowl. And so when we talk about the 2 life, we really talk about that in conjunction with what bowl are you living in and how do we shatter that bowl so that you can live an even more abundant life than what you were imagining. And ironically, what we find is once we do that the first time, you just get into another bowl, right? So now there's just another bowl for you to shatter and to live a life of even more abundance. And I think it's aspirational in some regards, but for at least the last 5 years or so, it's been a very intentional way that we've tried to live our lives, at least in the Regan household.
Yeah, and what's interesting with that, Tim, is it's how do you live a 2 life, regardless of what that dollar amount is in your bank account or on your wealth statement. How are you living that life? And when you talk about getting out of your fishbowl, it resonates with me. I recently just traveled over to Europe and I was in Slovakia, and I was getting a tour of a region in northern Slovakia. And they were talking about how people, their standard of living is they make around $1,000 a month. And that's acceptable to them in their fishbowl. That's just what they do. That's what they live. But then if they leave Slovakia and they come to the United States, for example, and come on a vacation, it's, oh my gosh, their money doesn't take them very. So there's a just different fishbowl that you live in. And Rich and you and I have talked about this many times. Is one of the books we read when we were really young was this millionaire next door mentality. And that book really resonated with Rich and I when we were pretty young. But yet it's tough because when you're in your fishbowl, you live the means of your fishbowl. You're a professional athlete, you live that. You live that. If you live in Slovakia, you live that life. Can you tell me a little bit more about your story, Tim, and why this became such a passion for you in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think it probably, when they talk about what started my fishbowl, the most prominent story that I recall is I don't know, I don't remember exactly, I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And when I grew up in one of these old farmhouses where the front of the house was the dining room on one side, living room on the other, an open concept. And we had the traditional door. It was wood on the outside, but it had glass halfway up that you could see through. And my dad and I are standing right in front of that doorway, just goofing around, having a good time in an afternoon. And then there's a knock at the door. We didn't see the person come up. We turn around and there's a sheriff standing at the door. I could see instantly the blood drain from my dad's face. I had never seen my dad scared before, but I could tell he was at that point, and scared, nervous, whatever it was, but there was a fear in his eyes. He went out, stood on the front porch, talked to the sheriff, came back and feigned a laugh, feigned a grin, and said, "Oh, that was Pete. He and I went to high school together. He just was driving by, stopped and wanted to say hi." I didn't know it at the time, but find out a few years later that sheriff was there to tell us that the bank was going to foreclose. We did not. The bank luckily did not foreclose. My dad did what it took to make sure that didn't happen. But when I start thinking about how that affected my life and how that created a fishbowl for me in the beginning, and then I look at my dad's life, and his fishbowl was created years before that when he got a phone call. His dad had been sick in the hospital. He was 15 and got a phone call before going to school. And it said, "Is this Mr. Reagan's son?" They said, "Yes." They said, "This is Riverside Hospital. We're sorry, but your dad has died this morning." And so at 15, to be the middle of 5 kids, have a single mom now, changed his fishbowl going forward, right? And so when I look at each of those stories, and I think now those fishbowls don't have to define us, right? That's not what has to be dictates your outcome. And so what happened for him is he ended up being a successful entrepreneur, despite that low point of the sheriff knocking at the door. He was able to go on and be a successful entrepreneur and ultimately help me get set up in our business and be successful here too. But that's never possible if we don't get past the idea of the sheriff's coming to foreclose on the house, or you never get past the idea of I now have to figure out at 15 how I support myself and help to support my mom and sisters. Though if you can't get out of that fishbowl, you never get to that entrepreneurial success or living your 2 comma life, however you describe that.
It's a really nice graphical representation I have in my mind of the fishbowl. And I get the concept of the fish only grows to the size of that bowl. I also get the concept of removing that bowl or breaking it and finding a larger one. What is the process of breaking it?
Yeah. So it's funny that you asked. We've got, as we work through this with different clients, we really have kind of 10 rules, if you will, that you have to know in order to get out of the fishbowl. You don't necessarily have to follow them. They're not steps, but you have to be aware of those kind of 10 rules, if you will. And for us, I happen to be a Christian person. And so the first rule for me is just that God always provides. And so I can live in abundance because I personally know that it might not be what I want. I might not get everything I want, but there's some basis for he's going to provide for us. The second one is that I have to recognize that I'm always in that fishbowl. So even when I think that I've hit the ceiling, I've hit the most that I can, I have to recognize there's way bigger bowls out there that I can get past. And I have to get my mind through that process. And I have to understand as well that once I get out of this fishbowl, I'm just entering the next fishbowl, right? So there's a kind of this progression. It's yes, I can break out of this one, but then I have to break out of the next one, and the cycle kind of continues over. There's another piece there that you have to start with saying, I have to be uncomfortable in order to get out of the bowl, right? I'm not going to grow if I'm not uncomfortable. And many times it really means that the thing I'm most scared of is probably the thing I have to do the most. And so it's how do I get uncomfortable so that I can grow? We also have a rule that says that the ceiling always becomes your floor. So what you thought was impossible at one point in your life, as soon as you cross that barrier, it's now your floor, and you don't go below that. Right now, it's easy. Think about the first time you went water skiing or rode a bicycle or any of those things. Super hard in the beginning, but then once you did it, that now is your floor, and you just expect that you can do it going forward. A big piece is small decisions always add up to compound results. So if I make the same correct small decisions, I'm going to get a compound result. And that works for the positive and the negative. If my small decision is I eat 3 cookies a night after dinner, I'm going to have a negative consequence. But if my small decision instead is I go for a walk after dinner every night, I'm going to have a compound consequence. And the same thing with your money. And so that's another piece that you have to just understand. We also think you have to understand that abundance always trumps scarcity. If you go into this and think I'm living in my bowl and the world is a scarce place, you're never going to find the abundance or the courage or the wherewithal to break out of that bowl. Dad had a saying when I was a kid that said, no matter what job you have, there's always a toilet to clean. And knowing that when I'm in my bowl, sometimes I got to do the hard stuff, the stuff I don't like to do. I got to clean the toilet in order to break out of that bowl. We also think that you have to surround yourself with the right people. There's that old saying that you'll become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if you're spending your time with people that are not going to help you get out of the bowl, then you're working against yourself. And then the last rule is that you have to have an extreme amount of hard work, persistence, and determination in order to get out of the bowl. And if you understand those 10 rules and you start using those, then getting out of your bowl, you can do it. It's the cycle that you then can continue to do it time and time again throughout your life.
Which one of those rules do you find entrepreneurs struggle with most? And how do you help them get over that hump?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is the concept around that there's always a bigger bowl, right? It has to start with my ability to perceive that I can get to a bigger place. If I can't perceive that, it is never going to happen. I know today it's probably politically incorrect to say, but I had a friend of mine who was an older gentleman business owner that told me, you should never be proud that you're the tallest guy at the midget bar. And that, I think, is what happens to entrepreneurs sometimes. We get to this place where we feel like, hey, we've got a pretty successful business. I can't really picture my business getting bigger than this. But if I can't get bigger than this, if I can't perceive it, I'm never going to do it. And so it's that concept of there is always a bigger bowl that I can get into.
So as an entrepreneur, if I come to you and I go, okay, I get it theoretically, there are always bigger bowls. I see Richard Branson. I see all these people who clearly they're in a bigger bowl than I am. I struggle to picture myself in a bowl like that. And I don't even know what the next bowl is exactly. How would you coach me to get over that hump and start to be able to picture what that bigger bowl is for me?
Yeah. So our specialty is really probably working more with individuals more than entrepreneurs. I think the entrepreneurs should call John and Rich and let you guys help them walk through how to get to that bigger bowl. But from our perspective, it's asking the questions, right? It's asking questions that help people to recognize that they're putting that self-limiting behavior in place, that self-limiting belief. So, for example, if somebody was sitting down with me and was asking me what my dream is for our retirement, I would tell them that I would want to have a place in Mexico that my wife and I could winter. And if they asked me, if they pushed me on that though, the reason I would say that is because in my mind, I have this self-limiting belief that I can't own a place on Grand Cayman, which is where I really want to be. And so that's part of my bowl, right? Part of my fishbowl can't picture myself in a place where I would be able to be on 7 Mile Beach on Grand Cayman, which is really the dream. And so therefore I'm settling for a place in Mexico near Cancun. Not a bad place to settle, but it still is my bowl, right? And so it has to be somebody outside of yourself that helps you to walk through that process to say, why can't you be on 7 Mile Beach? What would have to be in place for you to be able to do that? Would you be willing to sacrifice this to get to that? Those kinds of things that you have to have somebody on the outside asking you those questions, from my opinion.
Tim, I think it was Bill Gates who said people overestimate what they can do in 1 year. They underestimate what they can do in 10. And they certainly severely underestimate what they can do in 30. We start looking at a long time horizon. And the one thing you talked about were these small decisions that add up and compound over time. And certainly you work with individuals and helping them with their wealth portfolio and growing wealth within their family's accounts. And one of the things I think that we do as individuals, I know I've done this many times before, and I see a lot of fellow peers doing the same. We look at the P&L of our companies. We look at the balance sheet of our businesses. We're balancing that checkbook and everything's good. But then on the personal side, It's a little bit of a dog's breakfast. Everything's all over the place. We're not compounding our money properly. We're not in the right vehicles. We're not getting the right support. And we're so busy working 10, 14, 15, 16-hour days in our jobs and then spending time with our family on this. We don't take enough care of our wealth portfolio. Can you talk to us just a little bit about what individuals should be thinking about as it relates to their own wealth portfolio in a way that they should be looking at the compounding effect, one of your rules, to get out of their current fishbowl and to be able to live their 2 comma life?
Yeah, 100%. So there are a couple of those things that stick out like a sore thumb. The first one is you talk about small steps and compound results. Very few entrepreneurs that we have a disciplined way that they're investing their dollars on a personal side. Meaning, as money comes in and I feel like I have a bunch, I might go look to buy something. But very few entrepreneurs have this discipline that says, every month I'm putting $1,000 or $2,000 a month aside that's going into my investment portfolio, and I'm just going to let it ride. Over time, that compounds into a big decision, right? Or into the significant dollars. The second thing is that many times the afterthought around the tax drag on our investments is just that, it's an afterthought. And too many times we find individuals, entrepreneurs included, focusing on how do I save taxes today instead of looking at how do I save taxes over the lifetime of the investment. And so many times we'll see decisions that are made today that really create additional tax drag because over the life of that investment. For me personally, my dream is that I live to be 123. I want to be in my 90s and water skiing with my grandkids, probably great grandchildren by that time. I'm 46. In that time period, almost 80 years left, there's a lot of compounding tax benefits that I can achieve if I look at it from a long view rather than just look at how do I save tax dollars today. And those two things are just disciplined, small steps that what we find is many times entrepreneurs in their personal life don't take, individuals in general don't take. And if they talk to their accountant, the accountant generally is going to tell them, no, why do you pay tax today? Focus on today. Or they think the way I get rich is I have to start with $1 million. No, you don't have to start with $1 million. Start with $1,000 a month, put it away consistently. You'll get there before you know it. So
we're all relatively speaking in the same age bracket, right? And it's what's funny is you look back over time and how much more money the three of us would, and anybody listening to this would have, if at the age of 21, when we were out of school, we were able to put $200 a week away or whatever it may be, but we were too busy enjoying life and doing things. But it's so important, the compounding effect of this. But you're right on these two things, just to touch on them again, is what you're saying is entrepreneurs pay themselves last. And when they do pay themselves last, they're so happy to get paid that they want to be rewarded for their efforts, and they go buy the boat or the house or some big purchase, right? And they're not reinvesting it. So I've seen that before. And then the second part is the tax drag afterthought. If I have to double click into both of these just for a minute, when you work with entrepreneurs on the first point, do you recommend that a certain amount of the money they're getting paid gets put into a different account? What type of strategies do you recommend people to consider so that it's just automatic? They don't even have to think about it. It just automatically happens. Is that what you talk to entrepreneurs about?
Yeah, 100%. If I have an entrepreneur who's taking a salary, right? Some don't, but if they're taking a consistent draw out of the business, just have a portion of that draw go into an investment account. Don't ever even see it. If you're pulling 10 grand a month out of the business, have 1,000 of that go into your investment account, have 9 grand stay inside of your household account, which is the same advice we'd give to somebody who's not an entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneurs can have that same conversation with their kids as their kids are starting out. To your point, John, putting that $200 a week away goes a long way to adding up, especially if you start in your 20s. And so absolutely, you don't see it and you don't know that it's there. And it's the same thing. Even if you're not taking consistent money out of the business, there's no reason why you can't set up a consistent investment into an investment account for yourself. Because if you're going to wait until you have a significant pile of money to go invest it, to your point earlier, that significant pile usually turns into a boat or a second home or something else, not into an investment account.
Yeah. And the thing I love about that too is that consistent effort of just paying yourself first into an investment account. creates that dollar cost averaging component that you don't have to worry about what's going on in the markets, what's going on, whatever. You just participate, you just keep going, and it automates. Let me double click on this tax drag thing. I'm a big believer in trying to minimize your taxation by using the tax code and what's available to you, so you can actually have more cash available to reinvest in your business, as opposed to writing a big check to Uncle Sam. No one likes to write that big check. So if we were to just have this debate right now, and I was to say, I could do this vehicle and I could defer some taxes, and that's good, versus your component, which is, no, John, maybe you should pay the taxes on that and then invest it over here, and here's the long-term effect. Can you give me an example of maybe someone you've worked with in the past that you convince them to not do this because of the tax drag and do this instead?
Yeah. So one of the easiest ways to think about that is when you start thinking about Roth IRAs. Just quick background: Roth IRA, different than like a 401k or traditional IRA. Traditional IRAs and 401ks, you defer the tax today and you don't pay tax until you take the money out in the future, theoretically in a lower tax bracket. The Roth IRA, you pay tax today, but you never pay tax on that money again. And so many times entrepreneurs have too high of an income to contribute to the Roth IRA. But there are ways that you can, one, do backdoor Roths, which allow you to put money into a traditional IRA and then convert it to a Roth. And you can do that for you and your spouse. So many times entrepreneurs are missing that tool. And then secondly, if they're contributing dollars into the 401k at the business, many times they're doing that all on a pre-tax basis, or that kind of traditional way, rather than contributing to the Roth IRA. And what happens is, I don't know today, I don't have that crystal ball. Is it going to be more advantageous for me to have paid tax today or then? I don't know. But just like I wouldn't take all my money and put it all in one stock, why would I put all of my deferred money into one tax treatment? I shouldn't. I should diversify my tax treatment so that if the answer was right today, or if the answer is right to pay it in the future, I've diversified that strategy and not doubled up on it.
Makes sense.
What's your take on permanent insurance as an investment vehicle where someone can take loans out of it and pay it back and there's flexibility, versus the buy term, invest the difference philosophy?
Yeah, at my core, so there's that validity to both of those approaches, but at my core, I believe that you should use the tool for what it was designed to be used for. So for example, if you need life insurance for a short period of time, use me as the example. My wife's been a professional mom her entire career. If something were to happen to me, we have 4 kids, something happens to me, she needs a lot of death benefit just to provide for my family's lifestyle. If once the kids are gone and maybe we're in a different place in life, maybe I don't need as much death benefit. That's a great time to have term insurance. It's cheap, covers me for a period of time. If, however, I want to leave money to the kids long term, at which we do, then I probably need some permanent insurance, whole life, or some type of permanent insurance that's going to fill that need. There are ancillary benefits that you were talking about, Rich, where, hey, what if I put a bunch of money into this life insurance and use it from a tax perspective? What typically happens is you're trading drag. So what do I mean by that? And if you have a traditional investment, you have tax drag that's going to reduce your long-term earnings. Inside of a permanent life insurance policy, you're going to have cost of insurance drag. Even if you try to maximize that for an investment purpose, you're still going to have a drag for cost of insurance. And what you save on the tax drag, you might be giving up on your cost of insurance drag. And so we can do the math and tell you, yes, this is the better approach versus not. But just if we look for a generalization, my preference is use the tool for what it was designed for, instead of trying to morph it into something that maybe it's not. And life insurance, permanent life insurance, is designed to have a death benefit, and it has ancillary benefits that could provide some cash, but don't use it the other way around. Don't use it primarily for a cash savings vehicle, and then ancillarily it has some death benefit. That's getting things a little bit backwards, in my opinion.
So you had mentioned permanent insurance as a vehicle potentially to leave money for the kids. I know one of the strategies around that is to get a second to die policy, if that's actually for the kids, so that the only time that's paid out is when both parents have passed. And that would be an example of something I think is a little known thing that not everybody knows. You can get a second to die permanent insurance policy. What are some other little known tricks and tips that you would have?
Yeah, for sure. And so to unwrap that a little bit, the reason that second to die policy is advantageous is when you think about costs, it is much less likely that two people die than one. And so the insurance company cuts down costs inside of that policy, which is what makes it more advantageous. Along those same lines is there, when we talk about permanent insurance, there's a bunch of different types of insurance that fall under that bucket. One of those permanent types of insurance is what's called universal life, and it comes in a lot of varieties. There's index universal life, variable universal life, traditional, lots of varieties of it. But what can happen is you can manage those contracts to really do exactly what you want. There's a lot of flexibility inside of those. Now, those are not obscure. People have heard about these before. But what happened was back in the 80s, when interest rates were really high, in early 90s, they were misused. And so they got a bad name. And so there's a lot of people now that hear the term universal life and think, oh, no, that's terrible. And if you Google it, the Google machine will come back and say, hey, stay the heck away from it. But it's one of those tools that can really, if you understand it, you can use it in a way that is really advantageous. The other part to that is another kind of little known piece right now, traditional whole life insurance policies, the type that your grandma and grandpa used to buy and they gave them to you when you were a baby type of stuff. Those policies right now are, in my opinion, within the next 10 years are probably going to turn into little gold mines where they just start churning out lots of dividends and lots of benefits internally. Insurance companies, when they price those policies, price them based on a combination of life expectancy and expected earnings or interest rates. So insurance companies have been really concerned over the last number of years about this low interest rate environment, and it crushed them. And that's been built into all of these contracts. What happens is when interest rates come back, if they were overcharging, like if they said, hey, we got that calculation wrong, they have to give you a dividend or a surplus refund. They put money back into the contract because their math problem was wrong. And so right now, our belief is that insurance companies have priced those and they're pricing them with this idea of lower interest rates. Interest rates coming back, we believe that in the next number of years are going to turn those policies into just little gold mines of just kicking off what was expected as earnings, expected as dividends, plus some added dividends because the insurance companies mispriced them.
So if you have one, don't get rid of it.
Don't get rid of it. Do not get rid of it. And if you're looking, that might be a good type of contract to consider.
So I want to validate a couple things around my understanding, and that'll set up a question. There's qualified money and there's not non-qualified money. Qualified money has some type of tax treatment. Non-qualified money does not. So just for starters, is that accurate?
Yep. You're dead on.
Okay. So in the qualified money section, the average bearer might use a traditional IRA. They may use a 401k. They might use a Roth IRA. They may use a health savings account, which money goes in pre-tax in that. And for someone who's earning a lot of money, who has phased out of being able to use a Roth, they can do a backdoor Roth. So put money in the traditional and then flip it into the Roth. And then as an entrepreneur, they can set up a SEP. Mm-hmm. Those are about all of the qualified money options I'm aware of, other than then going to life insurance. Before, you just have to put money into other investments, whether it be real estate or wherever it is. But in terms of just straight up putting money somewhere as an investment, qualified, not qualified, after those investments I just named are tapped out, am I missing any, first of all? And then second of all, once the qualified investments have tapped out, what's your recommendation?
Sure. So the only other area that I would suggest that you could look into are some non-qualified deferred compensation plans. So what that means is, so we talked about this qualified, non-qualified, and being tax preferred versus non-tax preferred. The one caveat there, and this is where the nomenclature might be a little bit off, but it's called a non-qualified, not because it's not tax preferred, but it's non-qualified because it does not meet some of the earnings tests that have to be met under a 401k and deferred compensation plan that would be deemed through ERISA as a qualified plan, right? So this is a way that you can be preferential with who gets to qualify for these kind of programs, and you get to defer compensation into the future without some of the limits of some of those other traditional plans that you talked about. And there are pros and cons, obviously. This is where you get into some pretty detailed stuff to make sure that it's right for you. For example, one of the downsides is you have to do it only with certain business structures, right? You can't do it inside of, say, a sole proprietorship or something like that. Another one is that the business does not get the tax deduction this year, but you as the employee or you as the entrepreneur also don't report it on your personal return. You have to do some math to say, does it make sense for us to do those? But no, that's another form of another way that you can save money on a tax preferred basis without falling into those other categories. Along with that, there are some benefits to the tax-free portion of health insurance premiums that entrepreneurs get and the way that they can be applied. So for example, long-term care insurance is something that if your health starts to fail, you don't quite die and you need somebody to take care of you, long-term care insurance can step in and help fill that bill. Those premiums are considered health insurance premiums. And so from an entrepreneur's perspective, that's another way that you can have some tax preferred paying of premiums, if you will, coming out of the business, which again is not, you can choose if you want to do that for yourself only or for a select portion of your employees. That could be a perk that you offer your senior executives in the business as well. So
is that to say long-term care insurance is tax deductible as an entrepreneur if you run that through the business because it's considered health insurance?
Yep, treated just like any other health insurance premium.
And then once those vehicles have been maxed out, what's the recommendation on a traditional investment? I'm aware of, you can do mutual funds, you can do CDs, you can do bonds, you can do government bonds, you can do outside of that stuff. Are there other places that you go, yeah, here are a couple little known places in non-qualified land?
Yeah, so it really, I think, depends on the appetite of the individual for risk, the appetite of the individual to be plugged into the investment and be active in the investment versus being passive, right? So there's not a lot of things that you think about that are traditional investments or that are not traditional investments that don't require either a high degree of risk taking or require you to be involved in the investment. So if you go outside of what you talked about, mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, bonds, those things, you can hire a professional to help you manage those if you don't want to, or they can be passive. You can pick a target date 2050 fund and kind of just put your money in, forget about it, and not have to think about it. Those can be pretty passive. But then when you start getting beyond that and you start looking to things like, do I buy real estate and rent it out? That's not always a passive activity. There's a lot of work that sometimes has to go into that. Similarly, if you start getting into some real estate investment trusts or maybe some private types of investments, there you have to have an appetite for risk because those are a little higher on the risk scale. And you have to have an appetite for, I'm okay tying my money up for some period of time. So it really has to start with, what's my appetite for risk? How long do I have to invest it? And how active do I want to be in making this investment? If you buy a hockey club and ice rink, that there's lots of work that needs to be done, and that's not exactly a passive investment. So
sure isn't. Tim and Rich, I'm impressed at how you rattled all that stuff off, to be quite frank. You were like speaking like a well-educated wealth advisor yourself, going through all those plans and what else is available. You caught me off guard in a few of the ones you mentioned. But I think this all kind of goes to the point of, if you want to get out of your fishbowl, and let's underline that with everybody's in a fishbowl. Sure. So if you want to get out of your fishbowl to the next fishbowl and make your ceiling the next floor, you got to have a comprehensive plan, and you got to be working at it. You got to be talking with advisors like you, Tim, that really know all the breadth of tools and available resources and get to know your situation so they can actually help you compound all these potential opportunities. And I know you have a podcast. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about your podcast, a little bit about how to find you, and who is a perfect fit if somebody should be reaching out to you and say, Tim, tell me more. I want to get some more information.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for the plug. So podcast is Retirement Readiness Podcast. And what we talk about is everything that has to do with living that 2 comma life. And so retirement readiness sounds like it might be just about retirement, but it really is about, how do I live that 2 comma life from a physical, from a spiritual, from a money, from a purpose, all of those things is the podcast. And our ideal client really is the client, and I'll put some parameters on it, is typically somebody who is 55 and older, who has $2.5 to $5 million in investable assets and is saying, I need some help putting this together. There are some firms that say, hey, we specialize in the $50 million people or 25. That's not us, right? We're that $2.5 million to $5 million in investable assets. Usually that means that I've done a bit of saving. I've done some planning. I might have some company stock where I'm at. I might have sold a business, but we're not the mega wealthy, but we're also maybe one step above mom and pop America.
Okay, awesome. And can you share with us your website in terms of people want to get more information on that?
Yeah, best website is PV, that's Paul Victor WP.com.
Okay, awesome. Tim, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for all the information. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
it was a
Tim.
pleasure being on. Thank you.
Stay tuned as John and Rich unpack today's conversation.
John, no matter what job, you have a toilet to clean. That is really good. Don't you often use is it chef, cook, and bottle washer?
Yep.
Is that what you use?
Chief cook and bottle washer, I think.
Chief.
Yep.
Chief cook and bottle in front of the house and like all that. So it is interesting when you think about there's no role you can have as an entrepreneur or within the company of an entrepreneur where there isn't a toilet to clean somewhere. And that was the advice of Tim's dad to him. And I think it's sound advice. I think it's humbling advice. No matter where we are, there's a toilet to clean.
Yeah, no question. Certainly as entrepreneurs grow their businesses, right? Because you typically, if you founded a business, you started off by cleaning the toilets every single day. As a matter of fact, you probably cleaned the toilets and did this and did that. And you're the chief cook and bottle washer. But then over time, you hire people to do those roles and you start stepping away. You get further and further away from the customer. And that's when some businesses get in trouble, because they're too far away from the customer and they're not cleaning the toilets anymore. And they don't even know if the toilets are dirty or not because they got their own private toilet back there. So I did love that as well in terms of no matter how big you get, no matter how big your business gets or whatever, there's always some toilets to clean. And having that mentality, always being willing to get into the business and do things is really important. There's a lot of rules. I tried to write them down as fast as I could. I don't know if I got exactly all 12.
How many did you get?
I got 8.
I got 8 also. He said there were 10. I got 8. Maybe you and I combined some of the same ones.
Yeah, maybe we did. But what I really liked about this whole message is the compounding effect of time. People don't realize how much time we have. By the way, we should have asked him, why do you want to live to 123? Like, why not 124? Why not 122? Why is it 123?
Cool number, 1, 2, 3.
Should ask. But the reality is lifespan is changing. And people think when they turn 50, as I just turned recently, and it's, oh my gosh, like time's running out. But oh my gosh, I got a 30-year plan, Rich, still to go. I got a lot of time ahead of me. 30 years is a lot of time to compound money that I could be investing or saving every single week. And there's one regret that people never, ever have is investing money too early on a continuous routine basis. And that's why I mentioned even to train our kids, hey, you make X amount of dollars a month, X amount should go directly into an investment account and X amount for savings and X amount for spending. If we train people early on that, it would be great. But we've been hearing these theories for 20 some years and still yet there are people of our age, and sometimes I'm victim to this as well, where I'm not saving enough money. I'm not investing of the much money that I earn. So it's a message that people need to hear over and over again, I think.
When you said that, it made me remember some of our time together in Las Vegas back in the day. And as I'm fairly well studied in poker and gambling and that type of stuff, I've read a whole bunch of books on it and I've practiced it. And one of the theories that I always have to help me get off of the table is I'll never regret leaving up.
Yep.
It doesn't matter how little I'm up. I'll never regret leaving up. But it's when I stay at the table and I end up being up a little bit of money and I stay at the table because I'm like, I can keep going. I'm not up that much. And then you end up losing. And no matter how little you lose, you feel bad about it.
Yeah.
So you reminded me of that when you're talking about you'll never regret saving money.
Yeah.
It's the same philosophy as a winning philosophy in gambling, which is you'll never regret leaving with the money, no matter how little it is.
Yeah.
If you can only save $50 a month, then save that. You'll never regret saving it, no matter how little it is. And odds are for the amount of money that anyone can save, when you think about somebody saving 10 or 20% of their income, and I think the recommendation is 20, although Tim had said something about saving 10. I'm sure that was in one vehicle, not multiple. When you think about saving 10 or 20% versus this big nut you're trying to save to for retirement, 10 or 20% of today's income is not a lot of money.
Yeah.
But it adds up. This compounding effect adds up. You keep leaving the table up a little, you keep saving a little bit of money, eventually it becomes a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this test. I don't know if you heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment. Have we ever talked about that? And I don't know exactly the full result of the experiment, but I've heard about it multiple times where they put a small child in a room and they offer him a smaller marshmallow. And they say, you can have this marshmallow now, or you can wait an hour and you might get more. And they were measuring how many would just take the instant gratification of the marshmallow. And then there's no more marshmallows versus the person who would wait. And then an hour later, they get 2 small marshmallows. They can either eat the 2 small marshmallows, they can wait another hour. And I think we have that just in our DNA, that you get your paycheck and it's okay. I have X amount of dollars. Now what can I go do with it?
By the way, they did track those people. I think it was a 30-year track. And the people who did delay gratification were ultimately more successful in life by whatever measure of success they called success.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the video of the kids that are picking the marshmallow up and they're sniffing them, and another kid like licks it and they're looking at it? It's the funniest video. If you haven't seen it lately, look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But I think where it gets more complicated, Rich, is where do you put this money? And this whole idea of tax drag and all the complexities of qualified and unqualified. And you can do this, you can do that. And if you try and figure this stuff out on your own, you're never going to figure it out. You really need the right advisors around the table. And the more income you're generating, or the larger your business, the more you need this board of protectors around you. You need a top wealth advisor. You need a top tax attorney. You need a top corporate attorney, or a personal attorney, or a state attorney. We didn't even talk about estate taxes here in terms of the death tax that exists and how these funds all pass to future generations. There's so much complexity. You need experts like Tim on your team to really have a well-guided, fully comprehensive 360-degree plan of your finances, because there is a long horizon in front of you. No matter what age you are, you need to start planning today.